What an absolute war. The promised super fight at UFC 284 absolutely delivered. And while Makhachev walked away as a unanimous victor, opinions are divided on his win. Right after the scorecards were announced and Islam got his hand raised, there were mixed reactions from all over the world. Alexander Volkanovski fell just short to clinch that double champ status, and some fighters and fans were really outraged by the decision.
A lot of people are going to be happy with that because they didn't give me a chance, but I gave myself a chance and I was expecting to win. I knew he was really good.
Calling it a robbery by the Russian, Nate Diaz was one of the first ones to declare that Makhachev got his whooped by the Australian. This was even brought up by a reporter in the post-fight press conference, and Islam waved it off by laughing and saying that Diaz probably smoked something before the fight. This obviously brought a few chuckles from the crowd. Joe Rogan and Brendan Schaub were watching the match together, and they couldn't believe the decision. They were convinced that Alex did enough to secure a win. They thought it should have been 3-2 in favor of the Aussie. He got robbed, said Schaub. Also in the stands during the fight was the middleweight contender Israel Adesanya, who could be seen celebrating Volk's win as soon as the fight ended. But there could have been obvious bias. Izzy is an old friend of Volkanovski. They even share coaches and have been known to train together as well.
Come back from the Aussies, and having him around makes me have to step my game up.
So it's understandable that he wanted his man to win. Even Rogan wondered if had been biased toward the man from down under, because they too wanted him to win before the fight started. The same could be said for a lot of local fans. It was Volkanovski's home turf after all.
Undisputed featherweight champion of the world.
Australia, look at this, I'm bringing it back home, baby.
Alexander Volkanovski.
So it makes sense for the crowd to be booing Islam after the decision. Fans watching online also had strong opinions on that decision. Many people had Volk pegged as the victor. On the flip side, Makhachev fans were giddy with excitement. But one thing that everyone agreed on was that it was a very close fight. Getting into the fight, Islam was the clear favorite. He was the bigger guy and the defending lightweight champion after all. Many had been predicting an upset in favor of the Australian though. Leading up to the main card, Alex did warn Islam not to underestimate him, especially in the ground. And boy, did he make good on his word. As we've seen in the past few years, once these Dagestani boys bring their opponents to the ground, usually it's game over. But the great really did stick to guns. Islam never looked comfortable on the ground against him. He never got to play his stifling wrestling game. Some of Makhachev's takedowns were absolutely beautiful. In one instance, when a strike from the Aussie kind of dropped the Dagestani, he just flawlessly turned that into a single leg takedown. But despite that, Islam was never able to make much of it. He even had Alex by the back and tried sinking in a rear naked choke. A commentator so accurately said that Volkanovski has no neck, so it made it impossible for him to be choked out. Then there was the obvious strength that the Aussie demonstrated. It was clear that he had done his homework and he really did make Makhachev sweat for it. But Islam proved that he was a more well-rounded fighter than people think. His striking was just so on point. Yes, Volkanovski may have landed more strikes, but the Dagestani machine looked really sharp on his feet. He punished any opening that the Aussie presented. An elbow by the lightweight champ left a nasty gash on Alex's forehead, and a knee left him bleeding from the top of his left eye. Volk may have done his homework on Islam's grappling, but he never expected the Dagestani to do so well on his feet. That doesn't mean that Alex didn't have his moments. He tagged the lightweight champion a couple of times and even dropped him to the ground in the final round. Islam was able to somehow ride that storm out in the closing moments of the fight, but things really looked dicey for the Russian. Most people and the judges agreed that rounds 1 and 4 clearly belonged to Makhachev, and Volkanovski did more in rounds 3 and 5.
I've seen Alex, you've all seen Alex back to back with T-City, you know, on his best submissions, guillotines and triangles.
The judges decided to award round 2 to the Dagestani as well, with one judge even giving him the third round. This obviously sparked a lot of controversy. Even Volkanovski thinks he won 3 of those rounds.
We'll go right through. Shout out to all the Aussies. Obviously, not everyone got the victory, but everyone put on a show for the Aussie crowd.
Just a couple of hours after the fight, the Great took to Twitter. He apparently rewatched the match and said that he thought he won rounds 2, 3, and 5. Now, obviously, that's always a matter of perspective.
You know, how are we? How are these rounds? And they're like, We don't know.
But the Aussie avoided saying anything like that he won immediately after the fight. Even in the post-match press conference, he said he wasn't going to blame the judges or the referee, but rather he's going to blame himself for not doing more. Calling himself his biggest critic, he admitted that he could have definitely done more in the fight.
Well, how do you feel about your performance tonight?
Could have done better. I know I could have done better. I think, again, I should always respect my opponents. I respect him.
He could be heard talking to his corner in between the rounds, saying that Islam doesn't feel that strong to him. To his credit, though, he really looked powerful whenever the two of them were grappling. He shrugged off a lot of attacks on the ground and even managed to get back up a few times. Anyway, now the Australian is calling for a rematch against the lightweight champ.
Islam touched on it. Me and Islam were talking about it. I was talking to his team about it. So we all said we're going to do it, but let's hope it gets over the line. So I'm going to push for it, because I know I can get that win. I know
Islam hasn't responded as yet to the challenge, but given that how the fight played out, the UFC might be looking to make this happen again. Both of these guys showed a lot of heart during the fight. They really went out there and fought for mere inches. Two true professionals, just demonstrating their love for the sport and their hunger to win. That was just that. No trash talking, no theatrics, just pure untainted love for the game, and of course, respect for each other. You see, most fighters touch gloves before they engage in a battle. These two men hugged briefly as the bell rang for the first round, before backing up and taking their positions. And even after Islam was getting booed by the crowd once the results were announced, the Volk could be seen in the back trying to tell the fans to calm down. Those were scenes that I've never seen in MMA before. They even took pictures together, hugged, congratulated, and thanked each other. Even their corners were respectful. Two true champions, if you ask me. I don't think there were any losers in this match. They're both going to walk away from this stronger and wiser, and they're going to rain down hell in their divisions. Volkanovski is starting to look like an even more complete fighter than he was. The grappling skills he picked up in preparation for Islam are surely going to come in handy, especially against Yair Rodriguez, who was crowned the interim featherweight king in the undercard of UFC 284. Alex already said that now that there's a clear contender in the division, let's get this over with. So that's something we're probably going to see this year. For Islam, coach Javier Mendez has been saying for some time now that his striking is underrated, and he proved that to be true against the Volk. Any new contenders in the lightweight will now not only look for his infamous wrestling, they'll know that the guy can stand up and hit as well. Islam did kind of let it slip that Dana White told him Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira are going to go into battle next. The winner will be the clear favorite to get a title fight against Makhachev. But then there are also talks of running back this super fight. That'll obviously come down to what the UFC wants to do. For now, I think these guys will be focusing on their own divisions. That's all the latest on the aftermath of Volkanovski versus Makhachev. See you in the next one.